Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, joins us. Good evening, Mr. Speaker. And is it true that you are comparing our current president, President Obama, to President Jimmy Carter?
Well, what I compared was the sense of confusion about our enemies and the unwillingness to be bold and positive about America when overseas, which are very similar to the attitudes that Jimmy Carter had. I do think if you look at the confusion Carter had, for example, about Iran or about the Soviet Union, it's a little bit like the confusion we see in the current administration about Iran or about, say, North Korea.
You use the term confusion. I suspect if President Obama were here, he'd say that's not the word I'd use, but rather that I'm sort of a new beginning, and instead I at least want to reach across the aisle to talk, not necessarily be weak, but to talk to them. Is that confusion, or do you disagree with that?
Well, look at the record of the last few weeks. President Obama indicates he would like to deal with North Korea. They set off a nuclear weapon. He indicates he would like to deal with North Korea. They fire a missile. He indicates he'd like to deal with North Korea. They suspend the 1953 armistice and say that there's no longer an armistice in the Korean War. We indicate we'd like to talk with North Korea, and a North Korean Navy patrol boat penetrates South Korean waters, causing an incident. Now, at some point in that list, you might think the North Koreans are sending us signals, but they're not signals of respect and cooperation. Similarly, several hours before the president spoke in Cairo, the Ayatollah actually said, the key leader of the dictatorship in Iran, gave a speech in which he said, beautiful speeches will not change the fact that we hate America. We hate America because of American policies. We're going to continue to hate America. And as Andy McCarthy pointed out, it's a little strange that the Iranians do everything they can to tell us that they are determined to get nuclear weapons, they're determined to finance terrorism, they're determined to undermine the United States and destroy Israel, and we don't seem to get any of those messages.
If the Iranian president, the Iranians are belittling the president for beautiful speeches, is there a harm to at least making an effort by going to Cairo and speaking, or is it simply that it is of no value?
No, I think the speech in Cairo in some ways was a very positive and a very creative speech. I think in some ways the president clearly represents the American view very effectively overseas. It's very helpful for the world to see that your father can come from Kenya, and in one generation you can be elected president of the most powerful nation in the world. It's very helpful for the world to see that we have a leader who is actually willing to explain and defend why freedom in Afghanistan is worth fighting for. So there were parts of the speech I thought that were very, very good. But there were parts of the speech, both his unwillingness to accurately portray the role of America. Remember, the United States has defended Muslims in Bosnia, in Kosovo, in Kuwait, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. I mean, we do deserve some credit as a country. We deserve to have a president go overseas and say, I am proud of what American men and women in uniform are doing in order to expand freedom. And we're not there as conquerors. We're there as helpers. Now, he partially said it a little bit about Afghanistan. But if you read the speeches, they're very, very, I think, confused about the nature of the world. And I think in some ways dangerously confused.
Do you agree that we could probably make enormous progress in trying to solve many different parts of the world that are trouble spots if the Israeli-Palestinian conflict could be resolved? I'm not saying that it could, but do all roads sort of lead back to that conflict in some ways? You know,
Greta, I believe if we could somehow next Thursday create Iowa cornfields across all of Saudi Arabia and develop wonderful opportunities for growing bananas all across Greenland, that the world will be a much more interesting place. Now, I think that's about where we are with the Israeli-Hamas peace process. You have Hezbollah in the north, funded by the Iranians, seeking to destroy Israel. You have Hamas in the south, funded by the Iranians, seeking to destroy Israel. The president yesterday talked about Hamas being a legitimate part of this process, yet we have seen zero evidence, literally zero evidence, that Hamas is prepared to in any way give up on its desire to destroy Israel. Now, how do you have an effective peace process when one of the two sides says, I want to destroy you as soon as I can, but I'd be glad to chat with you between now and the time I destroy you.
I guess that I wasn't, what I was suggesting is structurally, in terms of trying to go about trying to at least temper things a little bit, is that you don't have so many problems with Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas if you sort of take away their stated motivation, which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Or, I mean, does it somehow, I mean, does it at least begin to, I'm not saying we can even solve these problems. I'm just sort of curious, like, you know, what do we try to bite off first?
Greta, the Iranian position on Israel is that it should be destroyed. Now, they don't care about some kind of temporary two-state solution. Their position is the destruction of Israel. That's why.
So, in other words, so it doesn't matter. So in terms of Iran, it doesn't matter if somehow we could try to fix, and I don't know that we can, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but Iran will remain a problem to us.
Well, first of all, the Iranians are financing the anti-Israeli terrorists, both in the north with Hezbollah and in the south with Hamas. So the idea that if we could cut a deal with Hamas, which is controlled by Iran, we'd have a better deal with the Iranians, starts from the false assumption that Hamas is not going to, in fact, in the end, do what the Iranians want. I
wasn't suggesting we cut a deal with Hamas. I wasn't suggesting we'd do a deal with Hamas. I was just trying to figure out, sort of like when you step back and look at the world, I mean, that everyone's using as an excuse this conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
But let's reverse it. If Iran tomorrow morning became a decent, law-abiding democracy and gave up the desire to destroy Israel and gave up funding terrorism, the Israeli peace process would happen overnight. So in a way, is the question, is Iran the central problem, or is the challenge of Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah the central problem? I would argue Iran is a much more greater threat to peace in the region than anything happening around Israel.
So then the next question has to be, what do we do about Iran? How do we approach Iran? What's the smart thing to do if they're sort of the breeding point for this?
Well, I think this is where the administration at some point this year is going to collide head-on with reality. In the case, as I said earlier, of Jimmy Carter, he just ignored it. I mean, he had 444 days of a hostage crisis. He had the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. He had the Nicaraguan communists invading El Salvador and taking over Grenada. He just ignored all that stuff, and it just all got worse. The president, I'm afraid, is going to find sometime in the next 4 or 5 months that nothing he says has any impact on the Iranian dictatorship. Nothing he says has any impact on the North Korean dictatorship. Now, the president's a very smart man. He has a very good national security team headed by General Jones. It'll be very interesting to see at that point if the president reaches the conclusion the dialogue will not work, then what is he in fact going to recommend to the United States and to our allies?
And that's right back to where where we started, sort of almost. Is that if words don't do it, if words don't do it, dialogue doesn't do it, what should we do? I mean, give me some options.
Well, I think the key, as you know, in our film on Ronald Reagan, the key was that Reagan liberated Poland, Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, East Germany. He did it by a combination of political, military, economic, and intellectual pressures. He did it without firing a shot. There was no war in Eastern Europe. The Soviet Empire collapsed. I think you could design a strategy, both in North Korea and in Iran, that would peacefully, over time, lead to a much more acceptable government. But I think it's very hard to see how, with the two current dictatorships, you're ever going to have anything except an armed truce where you have to worry every morning about what they do, and where every week they either get more nuclear weapons in North Korea or they get closer to having their first nuclear weapon in Iran.
All right, so I guess the model is the Ronald Reagan model in your mind. So I guess the question has to be, what would Ronald Reagan do?
I think that's right, and I think, you just quoted the Heritage Foundation slogan. I do think, but I think it's not just Reagan. Historically, when you're faced with an opponent who is unwilling to change, you either have to decide you're going to live with it, or you have to decide you're going to find a way to replace the opponent. Ideally, you'd like to replace them without military action, and you'd like to replace them by a combination of economic and political and information warfare techniques that are nonviolent.